Are we good? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Zoning Board of Adjustment hearing on July 16th at 6:30. We are here tonight to hear two matters. William S. Griffith's irrevocable trust application for a variance and Eversource Energy's application for a special exception. And if anyone in this room is here for not those two, you're in the wrong place. And we will take them, actually we have an administrative matter. Some of our members are absent for various reasons, which I will not elaborate on. But we do need to identify the 5 voting members of the board who will render the decision tonight, presuming we get to that point and don't continue either of the matters. I was here at the previous time. I will vote. Steve, you were here. Steve was a voting member the last time. We had 2 voting members, Ann and Heidi, who are now absent, and so therefore we need to deputize 3 other voting members, and we will take them in the order of seniority. So, Peter, I'd like you to be a voting member. Conrad, you were here before. If you would like to be a voting member, that'd be great. And then also Lauren, and I mean them in no order at all. And I'm sorry, Julia, our quorum is met, so you are more than likely to stay and participate in the discussion. However, we cannot allow you to vote. Okay, so then if there's no other matters, administrative matters we need to do, then we should proceed, which is with the Griffin Irrevocable Trust, which has been continued from a previous session to today. The board should be have in their possession a narrative written by Melissa, which enumerated the history of the property and set forth an argument or two as to why the board should grant the variance. So I'm going to, now that I found it, thank you very much, 3 pages. If you would like to step up to the microphone and continue where we left off, we would love to hear from you. Please identify yourself for the record and push the little button so that the green circle shows and you will be live.
Okay. Melissa Allen from Gray Ledges, helping to submit the application and criteria to meet the zoning variance criteria.
Right. So you should then...
Do you want me to read this?
Well, let me ask the board.
Okay.
Of the 5 variance criteria, does the board wish to hear arguments on all 5 based on those of, well, actually, I guess we do, because there were some members who were not here previously, so, or were not voting members previously. In either event, then, Melissa, I would kindly ask you to readdress all of the 5 criteria. Make your arguments as to each of the 5 criteria.
So last time I was here, there were a lot of questions that people had that I've answered in the narrative before the variance criteria.
Okay.
Some questions came up about history, some came up about the mapping and the layout of the building. So my narrative also helps go through that to then get into the variance. So should I just sort of go with what I've got so that it's all answered?
We can do a couple of different ways here. I can go through the variance criteria one by one and just say, Melissa, tell me why your proposed change in the density is not contrary to the public interest.
Okay.
And you can just tell me what your
Sure,
feelings.
the variance is not contrary to the public interest and will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood as residential use is allowed in the commercial zone. The additional of 4 residential units will not alter the essential character, nor exterior changes are proposed, nor will it threaten the public safety nor welfare.
Okay. Board members, do you have any questions about, I'll just take them, we'll discuss them seriatim, or just, I'll take questions now and then we'll move to the second one, and then we will go and we will deliberate among ourselves once the public testimony period has terminated. Does anyone have any questions of her on this particular element?
I do, yes.
Please do.
So, Melissa, real quickly, your credentials, as long as we're starting out, you're a real estate agent
Yes, yep, and property manager.
and property manager. Do you do any commercial, or is it entirely residential?
It's mostly residential. I do dabble here and there with a commercial office.
Okay. In your experience in the town of New London, are there many units available to rent?
There's a fair amount over in the mall where Tucker's is located, and then there's a few over in the mall with the Chinese restaurant, and I just don't know the names of those areas, but those are typical traditional areas I would expect to have openings and businesses.
Okay, but out of our, I'm aiming at the public interest question.
Okay.
Because, I'm familiar with our master plan.
Yep.
And I'm familiar enough with the market too, and I've attended housing commission meetings and planning board meetings, and there's a consistent concern about affordable housing. And I believe that we had evidence before that these are small units, affordable units. And so it seems to me the public interest would favor a residential use which is affordable. Is that?
I agree. We need affordable housing, and even now, we had some water damage, and the tenants are still living there in conditions that aren't ideal because there's no place for them to really go that's affordable. So more units like this are definitely needed, and I like that the essential services are so close because that kind of housing near the essential services has really been taken out of that area.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
If I may, Stephen, also there was a case you had referred to us that came from the housing court, and in it they state that they recognized the fact that in 2022, when this case was decided, there was a statewide housing shortage. And I'm not sure, and there's no evidence that's been presented to suggest that that has been alleviated in any manner as of today.
Correct.
But you do point out, though, that there are commercial units available and unoccupied at the present time in the town of New London.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, continue with any other questions from the board members with respect to that? Yes, go ahead, Conrad.
Just one question. Do you have available to you the history of the occupancy of residents?
Yes, it was on pages 1 and a half.
Did you not get the narrative that was provided? It's okay. You might go ahead and just tell them, yeah. You
Okay.
want to run through maybe it's some benefit of the people in the gallery that had not heard it, so.
Okay, let me just kind of run down. Let's see. So I had a recent conversation with Mr. Griffiths, and he purchased the building in 1985. So my history goes from 85 to current as much as town documents can support and Mr. Griffiths' memory can support. At the time, there was an auto body or an auto parts shop in the bottom units. Until about 1989. We think, and this is not on the sheet, but I was just asking, we think that there might have been a video store in that location at some point, but I don't have any records to that, and memory is sketchy. The auto parts shop became Curves from 2003 and 2006. That we can roughly confirm. Unit 7, when the owner purchased it, was part of an old office for the former owner, which Mr. Griffiths turned into a place for he and his family to live off-season when they weren't at their lake cottage. And then we do have recollection of Unit 5 and 4 being used by the radio station. So 5 was for the recording and 4 was the office. In about 1990, the radio station moved to Newport, and then a midwifery office and massage studio took over Unit 4. And then 5 was just a recording broadcasting studio till about last year, and that's virtually been empty. In 2009, Mr. Griffiths added a fire escape because, as he recalls, the town asked for a second egress to the upstairs unit because they only had one. Let's see. And that was for units 3 and 4. So the units that have always been residential would be 1, 2, 3, and 6.
Have they been occupied by residents? See, we speak
Yes,
about,
7 are currently occupied.
Okay.
But it's a varying history of what's happened. So for example, we just had a water leak, so the lady in 7 went to Unit 4. Because Unit 4 has never been lived in, we immediately tried to get ADT to come in and finish their ADT work to make it up to the level it needs to be. But no one had lived in 4 prior to the last month because of this water line break that we had that half destroyed her apartment. So it's like there's some units that are a question.
yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out is if there actually was that much need for this particular housing, or whether we had it empty part of the time with just the ones we had.
He's been slowly renovating, and basically the commercial spaces have been changing without a lot of luck in re-renting them. So he's been converting them over to residential. That's
They all fill then.
7 out of 9 are filled. Once we started this process, we stopped renting. I do have a stack of applications for the other 2, should you agree that we can go forward with filling those. And then we have some work to do because of our damage done through the water. It was a toilet water line that broke, basically,
Okay.
and did damage to 3 units. So does that help answer that? Okay. And then, so curves was, the auto parts became curves. Then Mr. Griffiths basically closed off some walls and created units 8 and 9. Those are occupied. Let's see. So I think that kind of gives a little bit of trying to answer your question and a little bit of the history.
Yep,
Okay.
thank you.
Yep, thank you.
All right, then if I may, Melissa, I want to skip the hardship argument for the moment, and I'm going to ask you to tell me whether or not the granting of this variance alters the essential character of the locality. So I guess in order to answer that, we'd have to start out with what is the essential character of the locality at the moment?
So in my understanding of it, this is a commercial spot. In 1950, it was built to be a mixed-use building. Based on no renovations and the way it was built, it really just can't continue to sustain commercial, I don't believe. None of the outside is going to really, has changed. We're not proposing any exterior
Understand.
changes that the world will see. But as it is in mixed use or commercial, it really, the world is moving on without this building. So it has a specific, I think that this building's purpose needs to change officially to keep up with the times.
Well, its historical use was mixed.
It was historically mixed.
And so across the main street, Newport Road,
Yep.
to the north and east, what is the character of those structures?
We have some commercial, we have,
Purely commercial, if I may.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
And to the south of that structure, right next to it is a,
okay, so which way is south? I'm so sorry.
well, it would be headed
it the-
inbound to the
So is it
town
around
on
the
the
circle?
same side of road, on the
Okay.
same side of the road.
So which is it?
Well,
The hospital's in
Adam,
back.
wait a minute. Adam has gone and fired up the
There we
map.
go.
Oh, you're going to do it that way.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's an old picture.
So there's your structure in the yellow.
Yes.
And as you continue on inbound, the next building on the right-hand side is what?
So facing it to the left, is that the VNA?
It's got some
That is,
pips.
that is
Professional building.
a dentist's office, a
Okay.
professional dentist's office, is it
Okay.
not? Okay. And then past that, we have the VNA, which is a tax-exempt org, but I mean, it's a going concern. And beyond that, we have the dry cleaners and the laundromat, which is a purely commercial. Across the street from that, we have the
Pharmacy?
pharmacy,
Yep.
okay, then another purely commercial use. In fact, this building, well, and if you can't see it with the Google view, but if you went to the map, you would see that if you went to the south to the southeast, you would bump into Holman Lane, which is a single-family residential neighborhood behind the Lake Sunapee VNA. And then to the west is an institutional zone, land utilized by the hospital, and the land immediately adjacent to this particular property is vacant at the moment. So I put the question again, if we change this, allow this density change, and we go to 100% residential use, will that alter the essential character of this neighborhood?
On the surface, the answer might be yes. The historical answer is no. If we were to go back to housing being near essential services and those buildings and those type housing units being taken away, then the answer is no.
That is an honest answer, and for now, if board members have no other comments or questions, I'm willing to leave it there for the moment. Yeah? We all good here? Okay. So let us go to the next one. What would be, so for this next question, we have to value two things. And there's two ways to look at it. I'm going to look at the first option, which says, what is the benefit to the applicant? What is the benefit to you and those whom you represent if we grant this variance?
I think it's a smooth transition to giving the public what they need, which is housing, versus some very painful choices of how to create commercial space where it's kind of an outdated building, an outdated floor plan to do so.
So if we grant this variance to the applicant, it enables the applicant to provide affordable housing.
Correct.
And possibly ease the statewide housing shortage in some small measure. Yes? Would you agree with that?
100%.
All right. And so the other value that we have to measure that against is, what is the harm to the general public if we grant this density variance for you?
I really can't see any, to be honest.
I mean, we've talked about the last meeting, we talked about traffic, right?
I think there would be less traffic.
And yeah, my recollection is that was your conclusion, would be less vehicular traffic.
Yes.
You mentioned in your narrative something about water usage?
It's actually down significantly since Mr. Griffiths has had 7 units filled versus when it was more commercially used.
Okay, and so if
And we can't explain that water change other than it's residential and they're using less.
And so if we talk about the harm to the general public, at least those individuals in the water system precinct, if we were able to look at them as a separate subset of the public of the town, arguably we wouldn't see much harm, would we?
We would not.
Anybody on the board have any? Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah. I was struck by looking at some of the materials that when there was a commercial use, one of the commercial uses was the Lisa LaRue Curves for Women Fitness Center. And their setup would accommodate up to 16 clients at a time, with a typical visit being about a half hour. And they were open 8 hours a day. And so assuming maybe they were only half filled, that was 75 visits a day So comparatively speaking, the intensity of the use, I think it's fair to say, compared to that, certainly.
Agreed.
Is less.
Yes.
And so when I think about balancing the public interest, I think about traffic, parking, and that's what I think our density limits are aimed at. But it's interesting in the commercial zone because there's no density requirement on a commercial use, and in the history of this building, the uses were more intense.
That's really well said. Thank you for that research.
Well, I say this we're on the record. So I'm saying, it's not our job to find the answer for you. But our job is to tease, but our job is to tease out discussion and help you to produce the facts I mean, since you're not trained in this area, presenting before a board.
I am not.
Then we're to tease out facts from you that will enable us to sustain a finding on all of these. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to promote discussion and just try to get to the answers, try to get to the facts.
Sure.
Within the structure of this
Okay.
variance criteria that we're stuck with, okay?
Yep, I
So if-
appreciate it.
Can I just have a question?
Please do, yes.
So it sounds that we're at 8 units currently, or is it 9 units in place?
There's 9 in place, 7 are occupied.
Okay. And so when did the 7 or the 9 units, when were they completed? Was that at a certain point, or what were the dates of the actual units being turned from commercial to residential?
So in my first page here, so there's 4 that have constantly been residential. And then when Mr. Griffiths bought the building, he turned number 7 into his family's structure to live in off-season. And then it's been, after Curves closed in 2006, he renovated 8 and 9 at that time, or I guess like within a year. And then that leaves 4 and 5, which he's just done in the last year.
And were building permits pulled for any of those?
Were building permits pulled for any of those changes in the apartments?
You ever get like, when you change the, what I'm saying?
Just 8 and 9,
Eight
and 4 and 5.
Okay, did you ever get any building permits for making a change to, basement? No.
Nope.
And was a contractor hired, or was?
He was the contractor. And in 2006, I think, no, it was actually 2003, there was reference to, in that site plan review for Curves, there was no of 6 units in the building. I don't know where those units were. Oh, yeah, I do actually. Hold on, I do have that.
I could say
Did,
he added, with the
Can-
curves,
Bill, sorry, can you just use the microphone because it won't be on the camera? Thank you.
where curves was, he added a kitchen. That's pretty much the extent of what he did in order to change it into, from commercial to residential.
what about the exterior window scheme? Did that change any?
No, that's been the same, well, as long as I could remember. Yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry, what,
He said the entirety of the exterior hasn't changed.
all right. And part of that building permit thing is, not, if I'm not mistaken, is predicated on whether or not you're changing the exterior configuration, is it not?
Yes, but I'm also getting to the point of.
Not that I'm
yeah.
discrediting what you're saying, I'm just trying to understand that I thought that if you changed a window, put a door in, then you had to definitely get a permit.
Yeah, but arguably kitchen too.
And the
Yeah.
kitchen, too, good point, that's right, well taken, yeah, kitchen particularly. Thank
So
you.
in the site plan review by Curves in 1988, they do reference 6 apartments.
2003, I believe, was the Curves.
Oh, sorry, okay, so this is from 1988. Oh, okay, hold on one second here. Todd Sarn, site review. The maps are explained accordingly. So this seems to be public hearing, workforce, public hearing, Todd Farm Division. So there is reference to the 6 apartments in this 1988 site plan work session.
I mean, I think the land use history supports at least the 6 units that were part of site plan reviews, and I think there have been 6 residential units, which I think gives them a legal non-conforming of at least the 1 additional unit. The question comes in that 7th unit that appeared sometime in the last 21 years. And at varying times, I think that there were other commercial tenants there, the radio station or Curves, that occupied different space throughout the building, but the sum of the commercial and the residential units never exceeded 6 at that point, from my understanding, until at some point the 7th unit was occupied. Now that the radio station has left, they moved forward with the conversion of the 8th and 9th without occupancy yet, and then when we became aware of it 3-4 months ago, whenever we started working on this, that's what precipitated this process.
Yes, but the ordinance that we have before us is just for the 9th apartment.
I'm sorry, the variance?
Yeah,
Variance.
yeah, the variance, sorry.
No, it's a variance to go to 9 apartment units.
To go to 9. So we're looking at, if we deny it, that then we'll be denying 7, 8, and 9.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, 2 of those vacant, 1 currently occupied. Correct?
2 vacant, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Do you have anything further to offer on this particular element of the criteria? Not required, just curious.
We're on number 3.
Well, I took them out of order, so
Okay.
we were talking about the substantial justice argument. And if you have nothing else we've pointed out that there will be an increase in the alleviation of the housing shortage and no detrimental damage to the public at large. I think that was the
Perfect.
conclusion based on the traffic surveys and the water usage, et cetera. You're looking at me like I missed something. No? Okay. Any other observations of the board? Okay. Then, with respect to granting the variance will not diminish surrounding property values, that is another criteria that we have to address, and we note that the board is in receipt of 3 identical letters from 3 different realtors, none bearing an original signature, but I guess in the age of DocuSign, everybody's fine with it, indicating that there is no, in their opinion.
These realtors all own property on Newport Road.
Understood.
Yep.
Yep. They do not determine, based on their opinions, that there would be any diminution in the surrounding property owners' values were this variance to be granted. Is everybody on the board coming to that same conclusion? Does anyone want to offer anything else? Any other opinion or?
Yeah, I'd just say that there already is a substantial residential use that's more dense than our normal allowance, and there's adequate parking. The commercial traffic is liable to be more during business hours, so actually residential use may balance out the timing of the traffic in the area, and so I don't offhand see any reason to doubt the evidence that's being presented by those neighbors saying it's not going to diminish values, it's not changing the exterior of the building, looks the same.
I wrote the letter, I thought it would be easier for them, and they
I
all...
know,
yeah,
I know,
so
I know, I'm just-
That's why, I just wanted to make it easy for, Bill Green, Melissa, or Missy Owen, and Jeff Owen. I just figured it would be the easiest.
I understand.
And they signed through .loop, so, which is
I know.
legally accepted.
I know, I understand that.
Chair,
I'm just giving you a hard time, yes.
and the fact that they're DocuSign does not invalidate the signature, so I don't know that I would question the validity of the signature because it's not a wet
Oh,
signature.
I didn't think I was.
So the comment about not bearing an original signature, it's still duly executed.
Understood,
And accepted.
understood.
Thank you.
Which brings us then.
And all 3 were in favor, I mean, this is sort of hearsay, but all 3 were in favor of this becoming a 9-unit and had no issues with it.
Right, the point being that 2 of the realtors, or one of the realtors has an adjoining business, and the others, one of them is down the street.
Yes.
But no, I'm fine with that
Yep.
as accepted and as before the board. I don't think anyone has any quarrel with the findings.
I thought they were the most relevant since they own and know Newport Road very well.
I understand. All right, which brings us then, unless I'm miscounted. Ah, yes, thank you, Stephen. I know. See, I miscounted. Spirit of the ordinance. Yes. Is this variance, if we were to grant it, consistent with the spirit of the ordinance? Yeah, we talked about essential character of the locality and it wouldn't change. So I think that's the gravamen of that argument, and I think we hit that. So that leaves then, unless I'm missing something, the argument about hardship. Unnecessary hardship. And this is the most challenging of the hurdles that you have to get across.
Yes.
So, if you could tell the board again why you feel that unnecessary hardship exists. In other words, what specific characteristic of the property you can identify that would cause the application of this ordinance to be, well, for lack of a better word, unreasonable, given all the other commercial properties in this area. They're all subject to the same restriction. If there's residential use, they're limited to density. So what is it about this property that makes it different, that we should deal with it in a different manner?
I've alluded to it throughout this conversation so far, and that is the building was built in 1950 for mixed use. And we, because of its very specific design and lack of modern updating, it's now sort of taking itself out of the commercial world to be commercially marketed and viable. So each of the units are about 386 square feet to about 661 square feet, going from room to room with a small bathroom in each. And the way that they're set up, it's really not set up for a modern office. It's really sort of naturally set up as apartments. So without making undue renovations or tearing the building down, the next natural step for this building really is the residential units. With that said, based on the square footage and where we could go with this, we could have five-bedroom units, which would allow, up to like 25 people. But what we're suggesting is that we have 9 one-bedroom units, and roughly, I guesstimated at 1.5 people per unit, so it averages out to about 14 people per building. If you had a couple in one, for example, and it averages out. I'm guessing that the real life implication would be less, however. So we're actually, we're really kind of working within the density and working within the confines of the building as it naturally stands.
Okay, so would it be fair to say, given the discussion we've had about the properties immediately adjacent to it, would it be fair to say that it is the only property in this group of properties on Newport Road that was built initially for residential purposes?
For this,
I mean,
for
are
this
there any
building,
other properties in that neighborhood that have
I
ever
only-
been used for residential use?
I know that the mall above the used clothing place, I know that there's a few apartments there, but that's, the place with the orthopedic surgeon.
The former market at the roundabout, over Go Lightly.
Yes, over Go Lately, sorry, I just couldn't remember
Oh,
the name.
that's,
mean,
okay,
that's
that's,
fairly
oh, the old
close.
Corseni house.
Right.
That was always a residential. There
So
was
they
always
do have
apartments there, okay.
residential up there.
There's that one.
And then I don't know if Hubert, above Hubert, if there's anything.
No.
Okay,
And there are the other residential properties on Newport Road between the pharmacy and where Powers Point Fabrics used to be have been torn down.
yes.
The residential use was torn down and rebuilt commercial. So I think it's fair to say that this is one of the few remaining properties in that zone
Yes,
that was built residential. Now, would not that distinguish it?
it would distinguish it.
What do you think, Board? Anybody have any comments about that analysis, that thought process?
I would just point out that there's adequate support in the case law for treating the building and its condition and its age as the special condition that
Exactly.
distinguishes it.
Thank you for that case, Stephen. That was where I got that, was from that case. We look at the neighborhood and we look at the structure itself and its prior uses. Okay, so now we
Just-
have,
Michael, if we do lose power, we will need to adjourn until we can get the recording. So if the
Got
lights
it.
go out, just
This-
cut it for a sec.
this comment having been made because there is a thunderstorm approaching, for the record. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the building itself it's sort of designed, as you're pointing out, for residential, even though it has had commercial use in it. It's not really a commercial building. If you were a business owner, this is something that, you go in one door and you go upstairs and you go into another, it's like all of the other buildings that are around it, which most of them, I don't think, when he purchased it, were even there. But they're built to be commercial buildings. You wouldn't want to live in them, like there's the laundromat,
Understood.
So-
That was my point. All right, so we have discussed and heard testimony on all of the 5 criteria from Melissa and others. Is there anyone in the gallery that wishes to add or take away from anything that's been said or presented thus far? Seeing no hands,
I have one question.
then I'm going to say, yeah, that's the next step.
Is there
Conrad, go ahead.
anything that has been offered why we should increase the density of occupants in the building beyond what has been there? Whether you characterize them as commercial or residential, it has been 7, right?
There's been 7 for a bit, yeah.
Right. So what is the argument that tells me that there should be 9 now and more density there and smaller spaces?
So we have 2 unoccupied units that are really unable to be rented for commercial purposes.
Right.
So as a result, they really make, it's a much better flow for a 1-bedroom apartment. So we really can't functionally market those spots for commercial use in
But
this.
you could market them for residential,
100%. I have a stack of people
but
looking
not
for-
necessarily small ones, a little bit larger?
The spaces, according to our plan and according to the 1988 site review or worksheet, put the square footage between 386 to 661 square feet per unit. And there is a need for lower income housing, which this is. We're about $1,000 a month plus some utilities based on if you're in the front or the back, with snow plowing, mowing, water, sewer, and heat and water included.
Okay.
So this is very affordable housing.
Okay. My question, though, is why, I thought we had an ordinance which said we needed about 5,000 feet on the lot area per family, right? Or-
Well, I'm not an authority on the zoning ordinance, and so I'm going to ask Adam.
You're correct, Conrad, and that's why we're here. So we're here to consider a variance which would allow for 9 units to be where 5 is approved, although they have a 6th legally
5, and we're
non-conforming.
already at 7, and we want to compound it further to 9.
Right, and I think that maybe one clarification that I think I was seeing in your question, the 9 units already all existed, however, a portion of those units were commercial and a portion were residential, so they're not actually chopping up anything smaller than what has always existed.
Correct.
It's just that the units that had, up until very recently, been occupied commercially, they wish to change that use to residentially. So the actual interior layout is not proposed to be changed at all, just that the radio station was the most recent usage.
Correct.
The radio station units would become residential.
And the midwife also.
And so then, the reasons for that variance, I mean, that's for you to decide the validity of them, but are the 5 criteria that she has laid out with the help of you all.
To Conrad's point, the radio station was 1 that's becoming 2, or it's 1 to 1?
The radio station rented 2 units, I
That's
believe,
correct. They
right?
rented 5, which is on the ground floor, and they rented 4, which is on the second floor for an office. They have since gone, 4 became a midwifery massage office.
Or an
which is-
identifier, not a number of.
It's unit
units.
number 4.
Right.
And then unit number 5 was renovated, and we have nobody living there.
Renovated residential.
Renovated residential, thank you.
So if we have empty units, how much is the demand for this particular building?
Very high. For residential.
Could you qualify that, or support that?
Yes, I already have a batch of people who are interested in the 2 units that we have ready to move in tomorrow if we're allowed.
Okay, a batch is how many?
I would say I have 8.
Okay.
I've got one that, when we started the paperwork, they're a really sweet couple from Wilmot. Without knowing that we were doing anything wrong, they were going to be moving into Unit 5. We had these troubles. We stopped them from moving in. Some of their items are still at my office. They call me every week asking the progress. They would love to move into Unit 5 or 4, depending on what becomes available first. I have many people like them just clamoring to get into some affordable housing that they can actually afford to live in.
Affordable housing in New London.
It's an anomaly. I have a lot of rentals and nothing touches this price-wise. Everything else is 2,200 and up that I have personally, not personally, but through Gray Ledges rented.
What are these units?
1,000 a unit with most utilities included.
Thank you, Melissa. Does
Sure.
anyone else? Yeah, Stephen.
Yeah. I'd like to ask Mr. Griffith some questions, and I'll tell you where I'm coming from. In our variances, there's now in New Hampshire a tremendous stress on the quality of the evidence. And so, and Melissa's providing some very good information, but I just wanted to ask you a couple questions. 'Cause
Sure.
I think you have a perspective. Now, as I recall from the last meeting, you are a contractor
Yes.
in your professional life, so you build things, and you've done substantial work on this building. Is that,
Well,
am I
okay.
correct? Or
I'm a contractor and builder on Long Island, New York.
Okay, yeah, so you know what you're doing.
So, yeah, I know what I'm doing. But as far as the work goes over here, I come up on weekends because if I don't, he'll try to do it, and that I don't want him at 96 to be doing,
Okay.
what he's doing.
Okay, so,
So
but
I jump in there and.
you jump in, so you're intimately involved inside the building.
Yes.
So at the last meeting, I think we talked about this question of the alternative, if, excuse me, assuming no longer going to have 2 commercial units, you could, in theory, take your 7 units and knock out some walls and make 2 of them bigger.
Doesn't really lend itself to that. It would more like, the 2 units that were commercial that he wants to turn into residential are really set up for residential. They were used as commercial, but they really lend themselves much better to residential. And the radio station didn't need a kitchen. There was a little sink and stuff over there that we embellished into like what is now a nice residential kitchen. And the same thing for upstairs, which was the massage and midwife. It was an office, but it's, if you had a commercial, if you had a commercial establishment, you want to make your way to the door and inside the door as friendly, as
Sure.
unobtrusive as possible. One step will actually reduce your flow by 50%. So that's why lots of people
Okay,
have.
I'm actually getting something different though.
Yeah.
But-
So
but
number-
assuming no more commercial use, but you could live with 7 units if you expanded 2 of those units to be bigger, to take in this.
They don't really lend themselves that way, except for one of them downstairs could conceivably, because it used to be like a storeroom for the auto parts, which is now gone. So the storeroom has been, he converted into an apartment,
Yeah.
which is occupied.
But if you did do that, you would incur costs to, it would add expense.
Oh, sure, sure.
And so you're offering affordable housing, and so you're trying to avoid costs like that.
Yeah, to combine some of these things into bigger units would require, a lot of structural changes.
And then the bigger units would then be, if not $1,000, would be more in the $2,000 range?
Right, and if for commercial use, which right now there are empty commercial places already in town that lend themselves more to being commercial places than this. I mean, for Unit 4 to be commercial, you have to go in the foyer, you walk up a flight of stairs. I mean, you wouldn't have any customers unless,
It starts to become less affordable the bigger they get.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was getting at, so.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, I appreciate that.
Anyone else of the board have any questions of Melissa? On any of the 5? Yeah, go ahead.
When was when the conversion in Unit 8 to become 8 and 9, what was the motivation for that move? Was it just because the commercial was no longer viable?
8 and 9 basically was the automotive parts place. That it took over. 8 and 9 is basically half, or maybe more than half, of the
Basement.
we'll call it the basement. It's a drive-in because it goes down.
But that was up to 2003.
6.
I think we're using
Left.
different sets of numbers. I think that what Pete's talking about are the last 2 units to be converted to,
On the ground floor.
Yeah.
okay.
That is 8 and
Okay.
9, then it was curbs until 2006. So what made him change in 2006?
Well, Curbs left, and I guess he liked the idea of turning it, it just sort of felt more like it should be residential, and he probably, you know, I'm sorry? Yeah, given the nature of the building. This is one of our tenants, Michael.
So are there any two-bedroom units in this? What is the makeup?
They're all
one-bedroom
one-bedroom.
units?
I did add some videos. They're not lovely because we did have
Yeah,
a
they were
water
tough.
break.
They were difficult to follow for me, so.
Was that?
I didn't really have a chance to
Okay.
dig too,
They're-
it just came in today.
It's
so.
really kind of ugly right now, so I was really kind of embarrassed that we took videos of this, but we had a water break, and so 3 apartments are in disrepair. But you can start to see in the second one with Unit 4 having to go up the stairs to get into an apartment. I just was generally taking pictures. Didn't know I walked so loud. This is the first time this unit has been lived in. This was number 4. And her apartment was destroyed, at least half of it. And I kind of forgot to take a picture. The bathroom's over to the left. So that was number 4. And if you wanted to see number 7, 5 is gorgeous. That's Michael's. And then number 7, or he's in number 6, excuse me. And then this is number 7, where Mr. Griffiths used to live. So you can,
This is the water damage.
yes, this one wasn't really affected by it. You just kind of have to keep going back. So it's kind of the nature of the layouts. Most of the units are really similar, minus Michael's in 6.
The only clarification I want to make for the record of the meeting materials is Unit 10 is actually the utility area. There's not a 10th unit.
I just took the video because it was open, so I was like, oh, if you need to see the utility room, the boiler was just inspected by the state, and we're in good shape.
Do we have ever a map that's accurate and current of what the floor plan is?
Yes, I referenced it in some documents that I sent over this morning, and there was a site plan that's referenced in my narrative, and the site plan was from 1989 by Harry Seidel, and this does appear to be correct. I asked Mr. Griffiths if this was correct, if any of the interior walls had been moved or changed, and he said no, with the exception of 8 and 9 were finished off to create the
So,
apartments.
With the exception, it's not accurate, really.
But
there
this
is
is
a
the rough
difference.
plan.
Okay.
Yep, and it was referenced in my narrative that I wrote. Yep.
So
Right,
that,
but we're doing a bunch of remodeling, we're talking about the flooding and whatnot, and I just have trouble. You've done a wonderful job videoing, et cetera,
flooding
but
came-
in my head, I haven't walked in that building. I've driven around the outside of it, but I can't figure out where all your numbers are because you're
Okay.
switching numbers here.
I have a video of it was the first video. I took a picture of the outside and I went all around the building.
Correct.
So 1 is to the far
Unit
right. 2 is
2.
down below.
3 is upstairs. 4 is upstairs. Unit 5. Unit 6.
Right, and I go around here and I've got 9 mailboxes already.
Yep.
but I've only got 6 electric.
We're coming around, right, because the back side, the owner pays for the electric. On the back side. The front pays their own electric. So you can see the big parking lot. Now we're hitting unit number 7 is right here.
Unit 7. Unit 8.
So that's the back of what? Up above the,
Of the building. It's,
Unit
yep,
9.
this is 9.
what's above 9?
Through
What?
What's above 9?
here.
Number 1.
That's, okay.
Yep.
And there's 4,500 square feet in the building, or?
I thought it was 30. Let me just go to the town, the Lister card.
Because if I square 600 per unit times
It's
9 units, I've got
It's
5,400.
381 to 661 per unit.
It's what?
381 to 661 square feet per unit. It varies.
Okay.
We're looking at the floor plan that you say that's largely similar. Where's 9?
9 is in the back on the far left.
So off what unit that's on the floor plan? 8 is 8 and 9?
And I'm looking for square
Structurally,
footage.
how is that?
8 has been divided, apparently.
I have, yes, 8 was divided, and the square footage I have, let's see.
The effective area of the building on the tax card is 5,900 square feet.
5911.
That obviously includes all common areas, hallways. Looks like
And
looks like the recording. Well, these working?
and that work area.
Hold on a second, Conrad. I don't think these are on.
And the,
I think the whole system just rebooted.
I'm supposed to keep testing. Aha! We have something. Everybody else up?
still recording. Will you just say something, Michael, so I can see?
Yes, are we, yeah. Okay, apparently the worst of it is past. We are back online. So, are there further questions? Conrad, are your questions answered that you had posed?
Pointing out that we don't have a very current floor plan of the building. So that's for variance to increase density. We don't really know what the density is.
So that's step 2 of this process. The planning board can't approve a new site plan with 9 units until they have the authority to have 9 units. So either the ordinance tells them that they have the right to that density, or this board tells them they have the right via a variance. So if you were to vote for a variance for 9 units, their next step is to then apply to the planning board for a site plan review that goes through that whole process of making sure that they have the units laid out, the parking, if they were going to make lighting changes or anything like that, although I know those are not intended. But it's sort of what comes first, the horse or the cart, and you guys are the step 1 of a 2-part process.
Any further questions from the board?
I wanted to explore a little bit the question of affordable use and because I think it actually, I'm going to discuss whether what we're talking about here is an unnecessary hardship has to do with just a residential use or an affordable residential use. And I think that it's within our purview to examine the affordability. So I wanted to ask Adam about to whether he can give us some information on the availability of affordable housing at this level. We're talking $1,000 a unit. Some of them have utilities, even if they don't.
Some of them are lower.
Some are
Yeah, we
lower.
have 2 on fixed incomes that are lower.
So Melissa has suggested that there isn't much here in New London. What do you know that you could tell us, Adam?
Yeah, the unfortunate part is a lot of this data simply doesn't exist, but there is some financial data for rental units that is reported through the Census Bureau, through their American Community Survey. And in 2022, the 5-year community survey in that 900 to 999 ballpark, it said that there was 10 units in the community. Those are self-reported. That's just the rent cost. That's not the utility and everything else, lumped in with that. Those are the asked rates. There's different collection of data for the contract rates. So what someone actually has a lease for, that has a median rent at just under $1,100 a month. However, it comes with a margin of error of $650. And so what happens with the American Community Survey is that unlike the decennial census where they ask everybody in town the same questions, every year there are households that are selected to participate in the American Community Survey, and you participate for between 12 and 24 months, and your answers are then extrapolated to the wider community. So personally, I just wrapped up being a 24-month household selection, and so every month I had to answer a whole bunch of questions, and they take maybe the 15 people in my town that they ask those questions to, and if 5% say that their housing costs are X, they extrapolate that to the wider population. The unfortunate part is when you have such a small sample pool, the margins of error are significant. And so obviously there's a big difference between $1,700 a month, where the outside of the margin of error might be, and the $1,100 a month reported. So as far as the availability, I think it's pretty sparse.
So I missed it though. You said on the range of 900 to 999 identified 10 units, and that was one source. On the census, what kind of number did?
And both of those are census sources. They're
Okay.
two different questions that they ask. One is the asked rent, so I believe that's the advertised rent. So not necessarily saying that somebody has actually, paid the price to rent it for that, but that's what the advertised asked rent is. And the other is the contract rent rate, which is, I believe, folks reporting that that's what their lease actually is.
But I missed on the second statistic. What kind of a number came out of that as to units in town?
They don't report, it's just reported on the median value. So
Okay.
the median ask was 1,100 with a $644 margin of error.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So I understand what you're saying, though, that in a town the size of New London, there aren't a lot of units that are affordable like this.
Right. And when you look at the small percentage of people actually renting, if they take, 100 people that they're actually querying in the American Community Survey, maybe only 3 of those 100 are actually renters because we have such a small portion. And so then of those 3, maybe one's paying 1,000, one's paying 4,000. It can be a very small sample pool.
Thank you.
Yep. And this is, this is one of the biggest issues with the housing crisis is that the data is just really poor. Nobody reports rental data, unfortunately.
I put mine into the MLS, but it's limited.
Adam, one more question. So in our zoning, we have workforce housing and for these units, if they're in $1,000 range or even $1,100, $1,200, am I correct that that would be below the rental level that would qualify as workforce housing, which is somebody renting 60% of the median income, which the median income is like 85,000?
Correct, and there are, and I can pull up the Merrimack County table too, if that's helpful,
Okay.
but there's a range based on your household size and your income, and then the 60% of the area median income and the 80% of the area median income. And then if purchase is slightly different, but same process, and this would be on the lowest end of the workforce housing.
Right. It would definitely qualify. I did the numbers, and I think it's maybe $1,275 or $1,300 a month would be the 30% of the income of somebody making 60% of the median. And so your rental level is lower.
Further comments? All right, at this point, I see a gentleman in the back, my neighbor. John, come forth, identify yourself, and put your questions.
John Ellis. My question was, when would the other 2 units be available to rent?
As soon as we finish repairs, so we have had some juggling to do because we've had 3 units really affected by this water line
Right.
break. So I would say in the next month to 2 months.
Okay.
I would jump in and say that site plan reviews required that may take longer than the repairs.
That's what he's saying, sure.
Okay. How many parking spaces are there now?
20.
Okay. And as I understood what you said, currently you could have between 18 and 25 residents there if you get these other 2 as a total?
I think we could, yes, if we change the dimensions. So we're just asking for an average of 14 people per the entire building, because we average 1.5 people per unit at 9 units. So it gives us about 14, but I think the reality is it would be less.
I was confused, Adam, whether you said they might be available in 3 months. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying any months.
Oh.
I'm simply saying that after this process, they have to go to site plan review.
Oh,
So
all right. So
their renovation schedule might
yeah,
be
so-
different than that, but they're not legal until
Maybe
they've
in the
gone through
fall.
that.
The
to-
6 units that are currently rented, they can continue to be rented, yes?
We have 7.
Oh.
And I asked if we should ask anyone to leave, and they said no. We do have one tenant who has given her notice to leave. We won't fill that unit until we hear from the town.
Okay, but you could.
No, because that would put us at 6. So it's questionable how many we're legally allowed at this time, but I think it's safer to say 6. So we've been told to not shuffle anyone out, but when she leaves, we won't fill that unit until we're given permission by the town.
But currently, you could keep 6 of them occupied.
Yes, it's my understanding.
Correct, and I would say that that's not questionable from our standpoint. The town's opinion is that they have a legal non-conforming 6 units, that there's a paper trail and a record in the parcel files that represents that was approved. I don't believe that it has been discontinued at any time in the last 30 years, so at a bare minimum, I think that they have one additional unit that is legally non-conforming. If they are not granted this variance, we would need to figure out how they're going to come into compliance. It sounds like if that were the case, we'd look out that somebody naturally wants to leave. Obviously, the town does not want to be the one evicting anybody in the middle of a housing crisis, and we're sympathetic to that. And that's why we've allowed that person to stay in place as we go through this process.
Right. Adam, do we have any idea of how many rental properties we do have in New London?
Unfortunately, John, that's part of the fact that the data is not well. So it's easy to be able to point to like Bittersweet, 32 units, and some of those. When it comes down to, maybe Steve's renting his house out and he's in,
Right.
some fun place for a year, we unfortunately don't get that.
Yeah, because I was thinking, with Twin Pines coming online probably in a year and a half or so, at their presentations, they had made it clear they're probably going to rent at $18,000 to $2,000 a month. So, if we could provide 2 more units here in town, that would provide 2 more individuals to work here and provide workforce housing at that rate of 1,000. So I would think it would be good to have that approved. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further comments by the board or the gallery or questions by board members, then the chair would entertain a motion to discuss. Been moved and seconded?
Second?
Second by Peter to discuss. All those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your right hand. I see everybody sufficiently to proceed to discuss. So we should go through the 5 elements of the variance and at least talk about what was presented in each case, and then once we're completed, we can put this to a vote. Who wants to start? Then I'll take them in order. Variance not contrary to the public interest. What do we think about that?
I'm going to allow, as I think that it is in the public interest. I'd echo what Mr. Ellis said, that we have a need for housing of this type that can be very affordable for people who are at the lower end of the income level.
And it also
doesn't have much.
It also would not change the essential character of the neighborhood, would it? Do we have any evidence that it would do that?
In my view, no.
Okay. Let's talk about hardship for a minute. What are the unique characteristics of this property that distinguish it from the other commercial properties in the area?
If I may, it's a building that's 75 years old, give or take. Its character, and we have evidence, and we all know that commercial buildings in this town generally look a lot better than that building, and that as commercial space goes, it's not surprising to hear that that they have no interest in those commercial units, and they're therefore looking to turn them into residential.
It's also, unless I'm mistaken, the only building in that area that was built for residential purposes and then tried to be used as commercial. All the other properties in immediate vicinity were built as commercial properties.
Yeah.
And not retrofitted.
So I do think the special condition is the building, not the lot size or any configuration of the lot.
Can I jump in on that? I think the only caveat to that, I would echo the special condition on the building, but when I look at the floor plan, I'm having a hard time getting to the 9 as opposed to the 8 based on the special condition and the layout of the floor plan.
Okay. Any other?
Because of the basement unit number 8 that was not updated?
Yes.
Okay. I'm confused, we're discussing, so I'm not following you, Lauren.
So I think there was a discussion about the fact that this is basically set up like a residential building. It's not set up like a commercial building in terms of entries and just way of how it was originally laid out. So the walls are a certain way. So when you look at it, and I think in the most favorable light with the idea of the public interest in wanting affordable housing, which I understand those points, you are looking at 8 units. And I think you're already asking for 2 additional units at that point. So I think that going beyond to the 9, I'm having issue with that the special condition allows for that much of an extension of the variance.
Reasonable return is not maximum return.
Exactly.
Thank you. I understand. Any other comments
If-
about
if-
that?
if they
You're
stop-
you're frowning at me. What, is there something I don't?
Well, I kind of agree with Megan that if, ideally, if the building were empty, it would be easy to convert this to 6 units. But because units 8 and 9 are full, and the upstairs units are full, those would be the most logical to combine, but that would require evicting people at this point.
I'm not following the concern about 8 and 9.
Are you proposing to leave some of it empty? In other words, I guess I'm not getting
I guess it
what.
goes to Conrad's point where we don't have a floor plan of the current, what we're looking at. So 8, I guess right now it's currently 6. If we've never gone to 7, so we're not evicting anyone,
Right.
right? What I'm saying is, for the variance itself, when you're looking at the original floor plan, which is what we're looking at in terms of what we're working off of, I think it's difficult to get to 9 based on that floor plan. I understand it happened, but I'm having difficulty getting there with the fact that the original floor plan supported 8, which is 2 additional above what was already non-conforming.
See?
I understand maximizing and I understand what we would want to do.
But I guess I had understood from the testimony that they have 9 units, though. And I understand that we're, currently, they're legally entitled to 6, probably not 7. And so our variance would go from 6 to 9, but if the testimony we have is that they have 3 units, and so
I think,
I'm confused about what you're seeing in the floor plan that says they don't have those 3 units. They have 3 units, don't they, that are
I'm
empty?
looking at the original floor plan. So I think it's a misjudgment to look at what they have and say that because it's there, that the variance is already, in a sense,
Well,
like where you have to look over, it's like, because it is, I have to go for it. I mean, that's, I'm basing it off of the original floor plan, because a lot of the discussion was about what the original intent of the building was, and having difficulty about having another use of the building, which I can get behind the idea that commercial space is more difficult to rent than residential.
and there's more of it available at the moment, which might
There
suggest that
certainly
there's
is.
not that much demand, as much as there is for residential.
Yeah.
And we may come back to that point when we get to a decision with conditions.
Could you
But I guess the
educate me
question-
just a minute?
Sorry?
Could you educate me with, if you give a variance, which is what we're talking about?
We are talking about granting them a density variance, that's correct, to
Correct.
allow them to have the 9 units.
That goes with the property and stays there, right? Regardless of who owns it,
Right?
and we don't know what the sale future is as far as unintended uses or whether it would be torn down, et cetera. But on that location, we would, in perpetuity or whatever, allow for that density.
Does it work that way, or is it disuse from 2 years resets the clock?
Correct.
That's
So
what I
we would
thought.
allow for that use until which time is it's discontinued for 24 months, and then that variance would cease to exist. I would say if you get to a point of wishing to vote on a granting of the variance, you may consider some conditions that would bind them to 9 units with the existing structure and configuration so that it's not immediately sold to a developer that's coming in and building, 9 luxury condos just because they have the ability of building 9 units. But I think that we have the ability to craft conditions to protect against that once we get to that point. But I think we have to establish that they've actually met the criteria before
We got a couple more criteria we got to hit first. Yes.
Thank you.
Now, spirit of the ordinance. And the question here is, does this variance, if it were granted, alter the essential character of the locality? What do you think about that one? Would it?
I don't believe so. It's a building that has 9 units that could be occupied. If 2 of those were still commercial, it would still be a building with 7 units and activity in 2 other units. As I pointed out, I think the level of activity could potentially be higher with commercial units, and historically, at one point, no doubt was higher.
We talked about that.
So,
Any observations? Anybody else?
The character has essentially not remained static, whereas the building has. So you've improved the character of that neighborhood.
By the virtue of the
Professional
increase in
building,
residential and
pharmacy across
diminution of
from it,
commercial.
et cetera.
Which
Which would be reflected if it's sold.
Yeah, I don't know if, I don't think sale
Right.
enters into, but the next item is substantial justice. We had a little brief discussion about that, and that is where we weigh the benefit of the applicant if we grant it to the harm to the general public by granting the variance. And I think there was some discussion about increased traffic, not increased traffic with residential use. There was discussion about reduction in water usage by changing to residential use. And then there was also a mention of the fact that by providing affordable housing in this situation, we are easing the statewide crisis as a benefit to the applicant. So does anyone have any problem seeing that substantial justice is done by granting this variance?
I'd like to point something out, and that is that RSA 672:1, Roman 3, blah, blah, imposes a duty on us that is heightened, I think, in this case, because we're talking about affordable housing. It says that citizens of the state benefit from affordable housing that's decent, safe, sanitary, and affordable to low and moderate income persons. The opportunity for development of such housing shall not be prohibited or unreasonably discouraged by use of municipal planning and zoning powers or by unreasonable interpretation of those
Or by
powers.
what? Or by
Or by the unreasonable interpretation of such powers.
unreasonable interpretation of
Unreason-
such powers. So
And-
that
and
means,
So I didn't invent this idea. In a Housing Appeals Board case, they pointed to this as a consideration for a planning board granting a special exception, but I think it applies in the variance context as well, that in other words, because we're talking about affordable housing, we have an additional duty under this RSA to be reasonable. Now, we also have that duty.
more reasonable than we would have been anyway.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Yeah, I don't want to veer off into unreasonableness. So I just wanted to enter that.
Is more reasonable mean more lenient? Does it mean more relaxing of the regulations?
Yeah, that's obviously.
Does it mean more relaxing of the analysis?
I think that does put pressure on us when we're looking at substantial hardship, unnecessary hardship, which means that owing to the special conditions of the property that distinguish it from others,
Which we
building,
have pointed out.
that no fair and substantial relationship between the general public purposes of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to this property exists. And so I haven't heard much of a fair and substantial concern that our density regulation has when applied to this particular building.
What do you think, other board members? You guys, what do you think about that argument? I think what Stephen's saying, if I may try to paraphrase it, is that we have been given a structure of 5 variance criteria in which to value whether or not we should allow an increased density on this particular property. And because of the conditions that have been pointed out about this property, it can be distinguished from those around it, first of all. And since it can be distinguished from the other properties that surround it, then we have to go to the next prong, which says, well, gee, given the fact that it's different, is the application of the ordinance as written unreasonable to it? Does it deny the property owner reasonable use of the property? And Stephen has come along and pointed out a statute that says, oh, by the way, since we're talking about affordable housing, you guys on the board got to be a little lenient here. We got to just kind of relax it a little more. Is that what I'm hearing? I guess that's what I'm hearing. So if you had any, it's almost as if you had any mere thoughts of saying, yeah, we'll increase the density, we'll have 7, but not 8 or 9. Stephen's statute is basically saying, you know, guys.
Well, I don't think it eliminates.
It doesn't eliminate the possibility, but it's kind of suggesting that we should be a little more lenient than we might otherwise be because of the nature of the subject matter, which is affordable housing.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out, Stephen. Have I summarized that kind of correctly?
You have. I think, though, the other way I would frame this is that we know that residential is a reasonable use in the commercial zone. There's no
Right.
question about that.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that affordable residential is also a reasonable use. And therefore, we need to consider whether this variance, that whether there is a fair and substantial relationship between the general public purposes of the ordinance and its application to this
Health, safety, and
75-year-old
welfare and all
building.
that. Right. We
So that, the affordability, to me, is a very important factor.
I would also suggest that it's affordable housing that is safe, secure, in a community, even if the community is the building, that is situated in such a place immediately near important essential services.
Right.
Makes it not just reasonable use, because residential use is permitted. Not only is it permitted, it is not only reasonable, it is in fact, should be considered favored
Yes.
in the current crisis.
I get the
So
gist.
under those circumstances, I think those are some superseding factors that we need to take into consideration as we are interpreting the variance criteria.
Which was pointed out in Melissa's narrative, I may. And as long as I don't mean to cut that point short, we should just let that sink in for a minute. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that granting the variance will not diminish the surrounding property values. And I think there's been evidence put before the board that would suggest that it wouldn't. So those are the 5 criteria that we've reviewed.
What is the maximum density allowed under affordable housing that you're comparing it to?
I couldn't answer that. We just changed the zoning ordinance and allowed increased density in certain areas. I think your question is, you want to compare this to workforce housing with a capital W, I guess.
Right.
Because this is workforce housing with a small w.
Yeah.
This is not, yeah.
So as the light becomes behind him, he will spread us forth.
So it's not necessarily a cut and dry answer, so let me get.
Yeah, classic lawyer answer. It depends.
All right. So this would likely be considered a multifamily garden style building. Not to a T to our definition, but, in having to sort of pigeonhole it in, let's call it that. So it would be 10 units per acre of net tract area. And this lot is it 0.7, 0.5? So in here, it wouldn't be much of a boost, which I will say is something that the planning board, this case, is highlighting, that perhaps the new higher density of the workforce housing unit overlay may not actually be enough in small lot scenarios. So I will point that out there. We've had those discussions now. Where did my... Yep, here we go. So if this were a multifamily townhome, it'd be 6 units of net tract area. Single and 2 family developments would get a 40% bonus. So it's based on the different style. And then if we went to a mixed rate development, that is a totally different... So this is for if there were a mix of for sale and for rental. There's a whole different calculation that you get into a bonus over the standard, which for this property would probably end up being the most lucrative option for number of units, but it's sort of apples and oranges. But that's sort of it's not an easy cut and dry answer.
I forget, how big is this lot?
Just under 0.6 acres.
Point what?
6.
So half,
6/10 of an acre.
as opposed to an acre with 10. Okay.
And so that's where I was saying that it really doesn't provide much of a bonus on a lot that's this small.
And Adam, since the workforce housing provisions were put in the zoning, how many workforce housing units have been created in London?
Since 2009, this ordinance has been used in its former version and its current version 0 times.
Well, is there any further discussion people would like to offer on any of these criteria? Are we ready for a vote?
I'd like to circle back to Conrad's good point. If we were to, and I would be the one to make a motion actually to approve a variance to allow 9 units, but I would insist on a condition that this applies. It's granted because of the special condition of this existing building, and that if there is some substantial change that increases the footprint of this building or tears it down to replace it, that the variance ceases to apply beyond the 6 units that they're currently entitled to. Because, as I say, the special condition is the building.
So they better take care of the building, because it won't be able to be rebuilt even on the same footprint to get 9 units.
In that condition, can we quantify the substantial improvement? Okay. So what does that look like?
Well, I suggested a change in the footprint, and I understand, and Michael, correct me if you don't agree, but if we apply a condition and there's a development so that they would like to change the condition, they can come to us. But the condition would be a change that increases the footprint, or a demolition of more than 25% of the building in a change. I would say that would.
A lot of the discussion goes to the affordability of the rent.
Sorry, Lauren, can you say that again into a microphone just so it's...
A lot of the discussion is tied to the affordability of the rent. If you lose that, then I think you lose a lot of the ability to get to the variance.
So in this case, a lot of the affordability is tied to the individual square footage of the units, right? So even if they were renovated to be in more modern condition, 380 square feet is likely going to still be on the lower end of the affordable market, right? So does it make sense to get into the nitty-gritty of actual like unit square footage that we can tie to the site plan that will come through the planning board, or, because I think that's a very valid point, that, if we don't have a mechanism of controlling the affordability based on income like we do in the workforce housing. Here, the controlling factor is simply the size and the age of the units, right?
Agreed, but that is most of the evidence that the board members are relying on.
Right, so I'm saying, how do we craft a condition that makes sure those variables don't change, so that the affordable.
Is there some type of body or document that defines market rate?
I don't believe so. I mean,
You
there's.
can do 75%, 90%, or there's really no way to define that.
No, because even in the workforce housing, it ties to the percentage of the area median income.
Which they don't want to get involved in. Am I
Right.
correct about that? I see Melissa nodding her head in the affirmative, yes.
Yes, but then get the benefit of the variance based on that. I mean, that's kind of what I'm grappling with.
Exactly. We're giving them a free pass without having to do the homework. Yeah, I get it, I get it.
But it could increase the rent, and there's nothing to stop that.
Right.
Except the condition of the building, which is what we're looking at, and the size of the units, which are
And the
quite
market
small.
factor, which is the size of the unit. right?
I mean, if the location is not one that I think is going to lend itself to more expensive units, even if they were to pour some money into it. It's the only way I think to make those units better would be to make them bigger, which reduces the number of units in the building as long as the footprint has to stay the same.
You say that looking at the exterior of the
Yeah, but the location also, it's,
The proximity to necessary services.
well, it's close to the street. Even in the
that-
videos, you could hear traffic noise. It's,
Yeah. Well,
So if we were to say something like, move to approve the variance due to the special conditions of the building, with the condition that the building not be expanded in footprint, and that the 9 units' individual sizes remain the same as to be approved under site plan review of the planning board, assuming that happens in the next, to sort of tie them to this 381 to 600 and whatever that, 61, so that sort of is that test of affordability, that 381 square feet, whether it has a new kitchen or not.
a luxury 380 square foot apartment. What do you suppose you could get for that?
I'm sure they exist,
That's
but
why we
I'm
need a
sure
floor
that
plan, but that
that
will come at
is-
the site plan review level.
that is still
That'll
more
come to the
affordable.
planning board. They can't get to the planning board if we don't grant the variance. That's how it, and once they get to variance, then they go to the planning board and they get site plan review, and that's where the blueprints come in.
But your planning board has waived the need for that a couple of times.
Well, we
Has
can't
waived the what, Conrad? I didn't catch that.
waive the need for,
They've waived various needs in the past.
Like, could you use your microphone?
It would appear as we went through the history that the planning board had been fairly lenient in the past and has waived various requirements, some of which would be that actual site plan.
I'm not sure that the planning board waived those. I'm not sure that they were ever approached with an application.
Well,
I think changes
I'd
happen
like to see a
without going
variance
to the.
have that stipulation, that we see one.
no, we can't, well, how do we do that?
So that we say, and the 9 units' individual sizes are bound to the existing unit sizes, which, it'd be nice if we could say, unit 1, this square feet, unit 2.
Yeah, well, I mean,
but-
how do you do that if it's got to be improved by the planning board later on?
Are bound to the units, individual sizes are bound to the approved sizes of the,
Or we do a conditional approval predicated on final plans from the site plan review. In other words, it comes back here after the site plan review.
you could,
Could we just use the range, 386 to 681, and say between 350 and 725 square feet? It's a zero-sum game. If they have 9 units and they make one a little bigger, one's going to be a little smaller.
It's a zero-sum,
as long as the
right.
footprint can't get larger.
Within the
Are you okay with that?
range of, and what was that again, Steve, 381?
I was suggesting 350 to 725, just to bracket it a little bit.
Okay. All right, let me read this back. So the motion would be to approve the variance due to the special condition of the building, with the condition that the building not be expanded in footprint and that the 9 units' individual sizes are bound to the approved sizes of the planning board site plan review within the range of 350 to 725 square feet.
Well, we need the demolition clause in there, don't
Okay,
we?
well, I'm borrowing it in
You need a demolition clause, got to
So
insert a demolition.
let me speak to that. In House Bill 1399 was a proposal that had a limitation like this, and the way they said that the condition they would apply is that it would not allow the demolition of more than 25% of the existing exterior structural walls. And so that's what I would propose, that standard. If there's anything that would demolish 25% of the existing structural walls would exceed the limits of our
Variance.
grant.
Did you get that language?
So,
Yeah,
so no construction resulting,
Or demolition resulting in destruction of 25% of the exterior walls.
But what if there's a casualty and they need to rebuild, and they're just rebuilding it back too? So that could be 25% or more, but they've rebuilt it back to what it currently is. So the language as proposed would prohibit, the variance would,
Yeah, so demolition incident to repair and reconstruction, is that what you're
yeah, I mean,
dealing with?
I don't think that's what you're proposing, that an
Yeah.
eventual casualty that were forced to rebuilding, if it was greater than 25%, would trigger this condition, and the variance would then,
so if we
Right.
said no voluntary reconstruction, I mean, I would consider a casualty
Yeah.
to be
Voluntary,
Yeah,
that
I-
solves
Right.
that word,
Yeah.
thank you, that's a
Yep.
good point.
Okay, so no voluntary demolition or reconstruction.
Did that have a certain square footage to the 25%?
That results in more than 25%
Of the exterior walls.
in alteration to more than 25%
trying to remember what this bill was getting at.
And structural in that too?
of the structural walls.
The load-bearing walls.
Existing exterior structural walls.
25% of the existing exterior structural walls.
What happened to that bill, by the way? It died.
And I would,
So was demolished.
within that, I would consider any forced compliance with like state fire code or things that may come along down the road of like having to put in a stairwell or anything would be involuntary and outside of this. Okay.
Outside of the intentional destruction or improvement or expansion. Okay, are you in a position to read us the motion that you would like to
From the
put
top?
before us?
Okay. So the motion is to approve the variance due to the special condition of the building, with the condition that the building not be expanded in footprint and that the 9 units' individual sizes are bound to the approved sizes of the planning board site plan within the range of 350 to 725 square feet
Per unit. Thank you.
per unit. No voluntary demolition or reconstruction that results in alteration to more than 25% of the existing exterior structural walls.
That is the motion before the board. Are there any
Second.
further conditions anyone is contemplating or limitations thereon?
Second.
We have a second. Now we can discuss it further if you wish. Is there any further discussion? Are you ready for the question? All those in favor signify by raising their right paw. All those opposed? The ayes have it. It is a unanimous approval of the variance. Congratulations, folks.
Go to the planning board, have fun.
You go to the planning board, and they will take it from there. Thank you for your patience. This has not been an easy discussion, but it's been a fruitful one. Okay. Those persons in attendance for Griffith's Irrevocable Trust are free to leave the building. Or welcome to stay, but they are not bound to be here. We will now call the Eversource Energy matter before us unless they've left the building, which I don't think they have. Good evening. Thank you for your patience. It's a little bit like the district court. It's a cattle call. You just have to sit and wait. So I understand that you are back before us for an after-the-fact special exception concerning some damaged poles that you discovered, and the only way to get to them was across a wetland.
Correct.
Okay. So lead us through your analysis. This was continued, was it not? No, this came because of additional repairs that had to be undertaken. Correct. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, we were here previously for a larger scope of work, anticipation of work, and
correct. Yep.
Thank you again for having us this evening. I'm Lindsay White. I work for GZA Geoenvironmental. I'm here with some representatives from Eversource Energy. We are here as Eversource needed to replace 3 wooden utility poles under emergency authorization due to infrastructure damage, and Eversource is seeking an after-the-fact special exception permit for temporary wetland impacts in the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District. These 3 existing wooden utility poles were replaced with weathering steel equivalent structures identified as structures 230, 231, and 232 were replaced in June off the west side of Morgan Hill Road. During routine aerial inspections, structure 231 was observed to have a broken wooden cross arm, which required immediate replacement in order to prevent public safety issues that could result from structural failure of the cross arm. And as a result of replacing structure 231, the adjacent structures on either side, 230 and 232, also need to be replaced due to stress on the conductor wires from replacement of the middle structure 231. Access to the structures required temporary wetland impact and wetland buffer impact over 2 wetland systems by placing temporary timber matting down in order to construct that temporary access road that you can see in the...
There was video provided of the work in process, and all that matting has been put down, the repairs have been completed, and the matting has been removed.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yep. The Eversource had filed an emergency authorization with New Hampshire DES for the temporary wetland impacts, and that was approved May 14th. The matting installation began May 24th, and structures were replaced by June 15th. And as of now, the temporary wetland matting has been removed entirely, and the impacted areas have been stabilized by adding the seedless mulch and will be continued to be monitored until vegetative stabilization criteria are met. And so that's where the project currently stands. The structures are up, replaced, and the matting is out of there.
All right, so does anyone have any questions of our representative regarding the qualifications for this special exception? No. Okay, well, are we ready for a motion? Like, what? I mean, there are certain things we should be discussing with respect to the special exception, that everything that was done has to be done with as much minimal impact to the environment as possible. You seem to have addressed that there is no adverse impact or tendency to produce any of these unpleasant situations regarding vibration, light, all that sort of unsightliness. But that occurred during the repairs, but that's over. No lasting, no adverse impact on the environment or discouragement of appropriate orderly development. Is there any other what? Yeah, well, no, I mean, we don't have any butters here? Yes, well, Brother Hoke, did you wish to add or detract or make any comment on the record regarding these repairs? Or any procedures they may have followed?
I'm a trustee of one abutter, and I'm a personal abutter, but the pictures would suggest that it was on a I'm sorry.
Microphone. Sorry, Howard.
You know it's dangerous to ask me for comments.
No, it's quite entertaining.
So it's Howard Hoke, and I am an abutter to the project, and I am a trustee of another abutter. But the pictures would suggest that it was on a section of the line that may not necessarily abut us directly, because I don't think we don't go as far as Morgan Hill, I don't think. But anyway, I've gone up and taken pictures of the areas that we do abut, and I just would say that Eversource, I think, does an extremely responsible job of minimizing impact and the way nature functions. Once those beams are removed and mulch is put down to hold soil in place, nature does a really good job of recovering in the areas that they've done the work, because the methods that you're using are minimizing the long-term impact. And of course, they have to repair their power lines. So anyway, that's the only thing I have to say.
Thank you.
And I was curious about process, coming for a variance or whatever it is. After the fact, I was mostly curious about
Well,
process.
apparently there are some instances where for them to complete the regulatory requirements, they would never get any repairs completed. And so even though we frown on after-the-fact conduct and hearings regarding after-the-fact conduct, sometimes it's necessary, particularly when you're out in the field and you discover something that you didn't know about before. But fortunately, they had all the gear there to do the repairs in a manner that had the minimum environmental impact and was consistent with the part of our ordinance that suggests that wetlands are extremely important to the town, and they are doing everything they can to minimize the impact of them, because all that stuff, unless I'm mistaken, goes into Pleasant Lake. That is that watershed, is it not?
It is, correct.
That's what I thought.
And I would say, too, that Eversource kept the town fully up to date, and as soon as they found the issue, they reached out to myself and the town administrator. We told them to go forward with the emergency repair as needed to maintain safety, and that once they had the actual plans done, because they really were not even ready to, to execute things, then we would come through this process. And just as a sort of aside, the abutter status that you are now granted is an example of a particularly unique scenario where a whole bunch of lots that the Webb Forest Preserve owns have now been merged into a lot that is over 1,000 acres. Wow. And so where the RSA requires abutter notification to everybody that borders that lot, you are actually a substantial distance from this, but it's a 1,100 acre lot, I think, now.
Right.
Michael, I have a question.
Yes, please do.
What's the status of the other structures? So you mentioned 3 particular structures. One was damaged, the other 2 had to be replaced as a result of the repair for the damaged structure. So you did an aerial inspection. What's the status of the other structures in the same vicinity that might also be in proximity to or in a wetland or other sensitive environmental area?
So Eversource does inspections on an annual basis to identify structures that need to be replaced in the near future. For kind of more details on that, I'll defer to Jeremy Fennell, who's with Eversource, but I don't know the exact.
Okay. I'm just curious about being more about the proactive plan that you might have in place for other structures, since I imagine this is not an isolated incident, that a wooden structure is damaged that needs to be repaired, so.
Right, so Jeremy Fennell, Eversource Energy. Yes, we do ongoing inspections, and these were, found to be needing to be replaced in an emergency manner. Usually, like the other project that we came before the board with, we're able to plan it out a little bit better, 6 months ahead of time. So there will be more rounds of replacements that we'll need to do in the future, but as of right now, today, we don't have any other, emergent transmission work that we know of in the town, so.
Okay, great, thank you, appreciate that.
Okay. Further comments, discussion, questions? Questions? You guys ready for a motion?
Yeah, the application seems quite thorough, and so I would move that we grant the after-the-fact special exception as requested.
Do I have a second? Second. Thank you. Second, Peter. Any further discussion? If not, are you ready for the vote? All those in favor of approving the special exception signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed. It unanimously passes. Congratulations. Job well done. Keep the power on.
Thank you.
Now, I believe we have minutes that need approval, and then
And the folks at the last meeting would really only be you and Julia. So I'm not sure that we can actually vote on them.
yeah, that's right. We can.
So we might defer because the last meeting was the curbside meeting, so.
It was a curbside meeting to continue till tonight.
So with all the abstentions, we would have to defer, so.
Curbside meeting, did you approve the minutes from the previous meetings?
No, we did not.
Actually didn't, but I don't think we posted, I'm not sure that we posted those now.
I certainly haven't read
Okay,
them.
so we'll add both to the next meeting. I do think there will be another meeting, not at the next meeting, but keep your late August, early September Tuesdays free. I do anticipate getting another application for a variance that we've been in discussion with the property owners for some time, so.
Lakefront?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Nope.
Just curious.
If it is, your house is going up in value, I'll say that, Michael.
Oh, man. Well, thank you, everyone. I think I would entertain a motion to adjourn at this point.
So moved.
It's moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Ayes have it. We are